Hi, I'm Larry Blank, and this is From the Pit, number 14. Today, I thought I'd talk about something that I think is a little bit interesting, which is how the orchestrations were prepared for the musical The Producers. And it started like this. The orchestrator for the show was the fabulous Doug Besterman, who's a very good friend of mine. And Doug had an enormous job to do on The Producers. It was an enormous amount of music. He was experienced, but it was a really big show for him. He had worked with Ralph Burns on Fosse, and he had uh, done other stuff with Ralph, and he was very experienced, but he was very young, and it was his first really big show all on his own. And as he was going, he got stuck and needed help. I'm sure he called Ralph, who was aging and a little ill at the time. And I think Ralph was the one who recommended me. And Ralph had introduced Doug and me while he was doing Fosse. So he thought to call me, and I was very flattered by it. So they flew me to New York, introduced me to the cast, and said Larry's going to be helping with the orchestrations, and then proceeded to give me a shed pile of music to do. There was so much music in the show, and of course the big Springtime for Hitler number, which Doug was doing, was mammoth, in addition to all the other production numbers that Susan Stroman and Mel Brooks were planning. The dance arranger was Glenn Kelly, who was actually the amanuensis, think Salieri, for Mel Brooks, and was a little bit more than Salieri in that he was creating a lot of the arrangements from basically Mel singing the tunes, in his shower. And Mel did indeed write the tunes and the lyrics, but Glenn was fleshing them out and putting harmonies to them and correcting it and accommodating Susan Stroman's needs as a choreographer. The music director was Patrick Brady. The assistant conductor was Phil Reno, all very talented and equipped people to do this sort of show. It was a massive amount of music, and I was just introduced as the helper, and I was handed 8 production numbers, which is a significant amount of the show. I had no idea I was going to be offered that much. I thought I was just going to help out and do scene change music, but I left New York with a big stack of music and went back to California to do the writing. There were about 10 days before the first orchestra rehearsal in Chicago, where the show was doing its pre-Broadway tryout. So one of the numbers that I was asked to do was called the Guten Tag Hauptklapp, which was the number that Franz Liebken, the big Nazi, sang with the 2 leading men. And it was quite a silly number. And truthfully, when I saw the number, I thought it would be cut from the show out of town first thing. But nevertheless, it still had to be written. And it was a good 400 bars of music. That is a significant amount of music. Think the typical song and a half chorus is 100 bars, 125 bars. 200 bars would be a long number. 400 bars is a massive dance number. So, and there was a lot of dance music. And Glenn had done a wonderful job arranging it, and it was quite a silly number. And I sat down to do that first because I knew it was going to take me a great deal of time. And Glenn's sketches, while gave me the indication of what had to be included, were incomplete as far as the orchestral choices had to be. So I had to sit down and work on this number for at least a couple of days, which seems like a short time, and it was, because there was still the other 7 numbers to do, plus much scene change music. And Doug was slaving away doing the other massive production numbers, especially that Springtime for Hitler number, along with the overture and everything else. So I sat down and I looked at it and I said, I'm going to write the best Nazi music I can write, make this as funny as possible. But the funny thing about writing comedy music is you can't make the music funny. The funny stuff is happening on stage. So you have to write the music seriously. So I just went into my brain and into my bag of tricks and tried to remember all the things I had heard and over the years, and uh, just went for it, trying to write this as best as possible. The orchestra we had was 5 woodwinds who doubled on everything, meaning saxophones and woodwinds. And we had 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and 1 horn, I believe, which is a pretty standard Broadway combination. The string section was 5 violins and 1 cello, which I thought was odd because it would have been slightly better to have 2 celli. Plural of cellos is celli, as is the plural of violas is violi. So there you go. So there was 1 cello and 5 violins. I asked Doug why he chose 5 violins rather than 4 violins and 2 celli, and he said he thought it would be better to have more violins. And I remember saying to him, next time write like a real person and have 2 celli, which he laughed and quoted me on the next show he did. It was a little difficult to write for that string combination. We had a percussionist, we had a harp as well, and Phil Reno playing keyboard had a synth, but it's my preference not to write too much synth when you have a full orchestra like that. And we did indeed have a good-sized orchestra. So it was actually the last of the big Broadway orchestras. After that, the orchestra started getting cut down considerably. So I sat down to write it and had a lot of fun doing it. I put a little accordion on Phil Reno's chair. And when I was done with it, I sent it off to the copyist and was happy about it. The next number I did was another song called Where Did We Go Right, which was a comedy number that wasn't playing too well in the rehearsals. I only sat there for 1 day of rehearsals, but it was a throwaway number and wasn't that important, but it was in the show and it was important to Mel because the whole joke is these 2 guys pick a flop show so they can, lose money and pocket all the stuff that the government doesn't check out in the taxes and stuff like that. So the joke is, where do we go right, and turn the show into a hit. The song was a very standard kind of Broadway fun number, and I also put every trick that I knew into it to make it quite aware that it was a joke. The other song I did early on was called It's Bad Luck to Say Good Luck on Opening Night, which was also a great fun song to do. The big joy for me was to be assigned the number When You Got It, Flaunt It. I was delighted to find out that Ula was being played by Katie Huffman, who was an old friend who had been in the ensemble of La Cage aux Folles that I had conducted several years before. So it was a happy reunion, and I was delighted to be assigned the number. To me, this was right up my street, as they say. It was a typical MGM kind of strip number, very much like Janice Page did in the movie of Silk Stockings, of stereophonic sound, a Dolores Gray type of number from early MGM musicals. So it was really something I knew how to do. And I had a great deal of fun writing it. And another number I was assigned was Haben Sie gehört, which was the number that Franz Liebken did, very much in the style of Al Jolson when he auditions for the musical. And also it was right up my street. And tell you something funny about this number, I kept on thinking it was Jack Cassidy. Jack Cassidy was a fantastic leading man and song and dance man for many musicals from the 50s on. And I had the pleasure of seeing him do many shows on Broadway, especially Fade Out, Fade In with Carol Burnett. And he was great at playing this kind of sleazy song and dance man. And that's the way I envisioned this number for the Nazi. When I wrote the chart at the first orchestra reading, I heard it and I was disappointed. And I spoke to Stroh and Mel and said, I think I missed the boat on this. Do you mind if I rewrite this for tomorrow? And they said, oh, it's great. It's great. We love it. And I said, I really can do it better. And Mel said to me, yeah, it's Al Jolson. And I kept on saying, well, I think Jack Cassidy. And he said, whatever. And I sat down and redid it. And that's the number that remains in the show to this day and is rented out. And I was very happy with the final result. The whole point was doing that Al Jolson type of song and dance thing, but making it sound like an MGM musical and a big Broadway musical. And it worked out very well. Another number I did, which I was very proud of, was called Till Him, which is the big ballad that Matthew Broderick sang to Nathan Lane at the end of the show. It's basically a very nice little love song for the two guys to sing, actually mostly Matthew. And I don't know why. I had an interesting idea of the intro of the song was a very sweet little thing that Glenn Kelly had come up with. And I decided to write it with 2 alto flutes and a bassoon, which is rather odd for a Broadway show, but I tried it and it sounded absolutely beautiful. And my great pleasure was at the orchestra reading. When Mel heard it, he gave me a big thumbs up, which was really a great moment. Mel was very hands-on at all the orchestra rehearsals, and fortunately, he was very complimentary. And some of the things I remember after they played When You Got It Flaunted, which was a huge success at the orchestra rehearsal with the cast called the Sitzprobe, and everybody cheered. Everyone in the room went silent to look to Mel to see his reaction. Everybody quieted down, and everybody looked at Mel, and he looked at me and said, Larry, good, which made me laugh and everybody else in the room. Also, when I did the Guten Tag Hauptklapp, Mel said, when did your mother realize you had all these anti-Semitic feelings? Which also gave everybody a laugh. But since this is my podcast and I can talk about myself, I will say that Robin Wagner, one of the great gents in the business and one of the most talented set designers in the history of Broadway musicals, was at the rehearsal, and he announced very loudly that it was the first time he was at a Sitzprobe where the orchestrator saved a song from being cut out of town. As I said, Guten Tag Hauptklapp was the first thing I thought would be cut out of town because it was such a long, kind of unnecessary number. But it was not cut. It was trimmed and made a little bit shorter, but it remained in the show for the life of the show. And bless Robin for saying that. Of course, I had a relationship with Robin that went back to when I was the conductor of Chorus Line on the Road, and we did another failed musical called Teddy and Alice. So he was predisposed to be very kind to me, but it was a very nice comment. And basically, Mel was very supportive, and Doug was happy too. Usually, you have to understand when an arranger calls in help on a show, it's because he's really stuck. And naturally, Stroh and Mel and all the people involved wanted Doug to write every note possible. And being the surrogate and coming in to help, you're not disappointed if your stuff gets thrown out because they really want his work, not mine. However, I'm happy to say Doug was happy with my work, and so was everybody else, and it has remained in the show. Unfortunately, due to contract negotiations and things like that, I didn't receive any credit for the show, which was just an accident. And I should have noticed it early on. But I will say that both Mel and Doug thanked me at the Tony Awards, which was very kind of both of them. And everyone involved with the show knew I had contributed to the show. But it was just great fun to be part of the whole process. Another number I did for the show was called Prisoners of Love. And that was another number that required a lot of work. It was a huge number. And it went into the big finale, which I also did, as well as doing the final thanks for coming. We hate to see you go, all that stuff, and some other bits and pieces. Doug was so swamped with doing all the other big production numbers, which were mammoth. I Want to Be a Producer and the opening number, and along came Bialy and Betrayed, which was a little masterpiece of work that Mel wrote and Doug did. There was a section in Betrayed that unfortunately was cut out of town where Nathan was imitating Ethel Merman in Gypsy, Mama, Mama, Mama. And Arthur Lawrence, the book writer and director of Gypsy, made them eliminate it, sadly, because it was very funny and very inside show business. The whole show was very inside. The great thing about the producers is when the show opened out of town, it was obviously a gigantic success. There was no questioning that this show was going to be a big hit. Everybody, of course, was nervous because it's like an election. You don't know until it's over who the winner is. But the show was a very obvious success, and everybody was really quite happy and smiling. The orchestrations were very successful from the go. Doug did a fantastic job, and I'm happy to say they were pleased with my work. And also it ended up with Doug asking me to do work on the film later on, which was basically just a rehash of the same stuff all over again, except we got to do it with a larger orchestra, with a proper string section of 12 violins, I think 4 violi and 4 celli. And the rest of the orchestra was pretty much the same. We might have added a second horn. I really don't recall. And it came out very well. And either recording, the original cast recording or the film recording from the musical, are very complete. Sadly, in my opinion, on the recording of the Broadway musical, sometimes if a take is good with the performer, it's okayed, even though there are some clams and wrong notes in the orchestra, which happened on the producer's recordings, a couple of flubs. And if I remember correctly, the recording was made before the show opened. So the orchestra was not totally into playing it. They were sight reading at the orchestra rehearsal for the recording. And it might have been the first or second time through in the New York production. So there are a few flubby spots, but not so on the film recording. Also out of town, the original Franz Liebken was Ron Orbach, who was quite wonderful in the part. And he was replaced by his understudy, who was absolutely wonderful. But Ron had a knee injury and had to leave the show. So that was a little sad thing that happened out of town. But the final result was fantastic, and the show was great. I've seen many productions of the show since with other performers, and I especially enjoyed the UK production, which was also very successful and had Nathan Lane and Lee Evans. And it was also very well sung. Interestingly, we had to cut down the orchestra ever so slightly for the UK and eventually the tours, maybe a couple of players less. So there was a little rewriting done. But that usually is the case. They usually cut a woodwind or cut the strings down, which happens as a matter of course on shows like this. But it was a very happy experience, and it was wonderful to be part of it. I think there was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm with Katie Huffman when Larry David and David Schwimmer were going in as replacements for Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick. It was just a big gag, and Katie was having a little relationship with Larry David, and they made a big joke out of it. But we got to record some numbers again for Curb Your Enthusiasm. So it was a fun time, and the show continues to happen. There's going to be a production at the Chocolate Factory in London shortly, and along with Mark Cumberland and the help of Doug Besterman, we're going to reduce the orchestra to what fits in the Chocolate Factory. What fits in the Chocolate Factory is 4 musicians, but they're going to use 10, and Gareth Valentine is the music director. So that should be a fun time. And it's very difficult to reduce an orchestra of 24, 25 down to 10. But in the case of the producers, I suggested we eliminate the strings because it's really very much like your show of shows, which Mel Brooks was involved with in the 50s. And it's just a big band. Most of the time, the strings are just nice. It helped that my mentor, Erwin Kostel, was the major orchestrator on your show of shows. I understood this music very completely and Mel's sensibilities. So it was great fun to be part of it. Also, there was huge amounts of underscoring in the producers that had to be done. And Doug happily had me do it because he was so busy with these other numbers. But I will tell a little funny story, which is there's one spot in the middle of Springtime for Hitler where one of the chorus girls is seen to be what is pulling the pin out of a hand grenade. Like she's holding a hand grenade and she goes and throws the grenade. And I remember spending a good 10 to 15 minutes figuring out what that sound would be. We were at the orchestra rehearsal. It was Doug's chart, but it was up for grabs. And Stroh was saying, what can we do to get that? And at one point, the percussionist suggested a pop gun. We tried that. It just came out sounding a little vulgar, actually. And with all the time we spent on this, it ended up being pizzicato strings, meaning just the violins going plunk. It is so quick and so brief that it reminded me of something that Harvey Schmidt once said to me about a bass button on the end of a number. You know, at the end of songs, they call it a button when the bass goes boom to end the number. And Harvey Schmidt said to me, sounds like a frog pissing on a blotter. Well, pretty much that pizzicato string taking care of the pin coming out of the hand grenade was very much like a frog pissing on a blotter. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting to find the denouement of the orchestrations for the producers. Please let me know, and thanks for listening.